My name is Eleanor Hayes. I'm 61 years old. 8 months ago, my son told me his pregnant wife had emptied their joint account, left a note on the kitchen counter, and run off with another man. He showed me the note. He showed me the withdrawals. He cried in my living room, and I believed every word. I defended him. I repeated his version to family, friends, even people at church. Then, on Valentine's Day, I was at a hotel in downtown Philadelphia meeting a client for dinner when I looked up and saw a pregnant hostess standing near the service station with one hand pressed against her back like she was in pain. She glanced at my table for half a second, and my stomach dropped. Because the woman my son said had abandoned her marriage wasn't gone. She was right there, 8 months pregnant, underweight, wearing a cheap black uniform and a name tag that didn't even have her real name on it. And the second she recognized me, she didn't look guilty. She looked terrified. Then she turned and disappeared through the kitchen doors. I followed her, and in a storage hallway that smelled like bleach and fryer oil, my daughter-in-law looked me in the face and said 5 words that changed everything I thought I knew about my son. She said, "I didn't leave him. I ran." I had built Hayes Development Group over 35 years, mostly by learning which details mattered and which ones people hoped I would miss. So when I saw Claire that night in the hotel restaurant, I knew immediately that something about Daniel's story had never fit as neatly as I wanted it to, because the woman standing near the host stand was not dressed like someone who had run toward a better life. She was dressed like someone doing everything possible not to be noticed. Her maternity shirt was stretched thin, her shoes were worn down at the heel, and the hand she kept resting over her stomach was not protective in a sentimental way. It was defensive, like she expected bad news to come from any direction. And when our eyes met, she went pale so fast it frightened me, then handed her seating chart to another girl and disappeared through the service doors. And I sat there just long enough to tell my client I needed 10 minutes before I crossed the dining room, past the espresso machine, and found her in a narrow hallway near the dry storage room, breathing hard, one arm wrapped around a shelf to steady herself. And the first thing she said was not hello, it was, "Did he send you?" And that question landed harder than anything else because it told me exactly what kind of fear she had been living with. So I said no, I was alone, and she kept staring at me like she was trying to decide whether I was lying. And honestly, she had every reason to think I was, because for 8 months I had believed my son when he said she'd taken money and vanished. He had shown me screenshots from their account, a printed note he claimed she left behind, and a story about a man from her past. And I had accepted all of it because it was easier to believe my daughter-in-law was reckless than my son was cruel. But standing in that hallway, I could see she was exhausted in a way that went beyond pregnancy. Her face looked thinner. There was an old yellowing bruise near her wrist she kept pulling her sleeve over, and when I quietly asked her if she was safe, she gave this small, bitter laugh that didn't sound like a laugh at all, and said she only worked the front because the manager let her sit between rushes, that she used a different last name, paid cash for a room by the week, and never posted anything online, because Daniel had spent months telling her that if she ever tried to leave while pregnant, he would make sure everyone believed she was unstable and unfit. And even then, she still did not trust me. She kept one hand on her phone the whole time and said if I raised my voice or called him, she would walk out the back and I would never find her again. And I remember telling her I had no intention of calling him because for the first time since this began, I was looking at the damage instead of the story. And damage is harder to lie about. And after a long silence, she nodded once and said there were things I needed to see, but not there, not standing under a flickering hallway light where anyone could walk in. And when she said that, I understood 2 things at once. First, that whatever Daniel had done was worse than I had let myself imagine. and second, that I had helped him do it by believing him too quickly. If you want to hear what she finally showed me, stay with me, because that was the moment I stopped asking whether my son lied and started asking how far he had gone. We sat in my car in the underground garage because Claire said enclosed spaces with cameras felt safer than open rooms, and what she told me came slowly, with long pauses between details, not because she was trying to be dramatic, but because she was clearly choosing every word like someone who had learned the cost of saying the wrong thing. And she explained that Daniel had changed after I made him executive vice president 2 years earlier. Not all at once, not in some movie villain way, but gradually, the way rot spreads under paint. First, he started talking like the company was already his. Then he pushed for me to step back earlier than planned. Then he began saying Claire was too emotional, too distracted, too careless with money. And because he said it calmly and often enough, it started sounding reasonable even to people who barely knew them. And then came Victoria Lane, the operations consultant he hired without proper board review, a woman who somehow ended up copied on internal emails she had no business seeing and spending more time at their house than Claire did, which Daniel explained away as work pressure and late nights. But Claire said the real shift was financial. He moved most of their household bills under accounts she could no longer see, asked her to sign routine-looking documents while she was half asleep, told her her stress was bad for the baby, and started keeping a record of every moment she cried, forgot something, or argued back, because he wanted a paper trail that made her look unstable if she ever fought him for custody. And when she found out he had opened a private data room tied to several vendor accounts that looked suspiciously close to shell entities, she copied what she could to an old email he didn't know existed. And that was when things changed from controlling to frightening, because Daniel stopped pretending she was paranoid and started speaking plainly. He told her that by the time the baby was born, the board would already see him as the future of the company, that I was slowing down, that he was tired of waiting for permission to live the life he deserved. And when she asked where Victoria fit into that, he told her some people were useful and some people were sentimental, and he was done building around sentiment. And that line stayed with me because it sounded exactly like the worst version of ambition, the kind that starts by treating family like an inconvenience and ends by treating them like obstacles. And Claire said the night she finally decided to leave was the night she saw the custody consultation invoice, a real one, already paid, along with a draft statement describing her as emotionally volatile during pregnancy and financially irresponsible. And suddenly, the note he later showed me made sense, because he had probably written it himself before she was even gone, had probably staged the missing money too, knowing I would trust records if they were printed neatly enough. And the worst part was not that he wanted control of the company, it was that he wanted control of the child too, because a baby completed the image he needed: stable executive son, unstable absent mother, aging founder ready to step aside, everything clean on paper, everything filthy underneath. And when Claire opened her phone and handed it to me, I saw screenshots of emails, vendor approvals, timestamps, and one forwarded chain from Daniel to Victoria that made my skin go cold, because he wrote, "Once my mother retires and Claire is out of the house, this gets much easier." And just like that, his motive stopped being vague greed and became something much more believable and much more ugly. He was not trying to destroy everything for the thrill of it. He was trying to accelerate inheritance, control the board, secure the baby, and remove every person who complicated the image of the life he thought he deserved. If you think I confronted him right away, I didn't, because by then I understood something Claire had learned long before I had. Men like that are never more dangerous than when they realize the story is slipping out of their hands. I took Claire straight from that garage to a boutique hotel in another county under my assistant's name, then called our general counsel, our outside forensic accountant, and my board chair before midnight. Not because I had suddenly become brave, but because I knew exactly how much damage a cornered executive with internal access could do before sunrise. And by 7 the next morning, Daniel's credentials had been restricted pending review. Victoria's authority had been suspended, and our auditors were pulling payment trails tied to 3 vendors I already knew should not have cleared at the levels they had. And what made it devastating was not that Claire's evidence stood up, it was how quickly it did. Because once experienced people started looking, the pattern was obvious. Approvals split just below internal thresholds, duplicate invoicing, rushed vendor onboarding, private communications outside policy, the kind of fraud that survives only while everyone is still assuming the person doing it belongs there. And Daniel called me 11 times before noon, first confused, then offended, then furious. And when I finally agreed to meet him at my office, he came in performing outrage like a man still convinced tone could win him back what evidence had already taken away. And he said Claire had manipulated me, that she was unstable, that pregnancy made her irrational. And I remember letting him talk longer than I ever had in his life, because I wanted to hear whether even one sentence sounded like concern for his wife or child, and none of them did. Every word was about exposure, optics, timing, authority. And when he realized that wasn't working, his face changed in this small, chilling way, and he said very quietly, "You're really going to hand my son to her?" And that was it. That was the sentence that finished whatever denial I had left. Because he didn't say our son, he didn't say the baby, he said my son, like the child was an asset that had already been assigned to him. And I told him no, I was going to protect my grandson from anyone who thought love and ownership were the same thing. And for the first time in his life, he had no prepared answer for me. And the days after that were not neat or cinematic. They were paperwork and lawyers and quiet terror, and Claire waking up at night because every unknown number on her phone felt like a threat. But 2 weeks later, she went into labor early and asked me, not her own mother, not a friend, me, to go with her because she said I was the first person who finally looked at the facts instead of the performance. And I sat beside her in that hospital room, listening to monitors beep while rain hit the window, and thinking about how easily decent people can become useful to cruel ones if they prefer a tidy explanation over an uncomfortable truth. And when the baby cried, Claire reached for my hand before she reached for anyone else, and I do not think I will ever forget that. Because forgiveness from the person you failed is heavier than punishment from the person you raised. And a month later, I amended my estate, restructured my succession plan, and created a protected trust for Claire's son with independent oversight that Daniel could not touch. But the real twist was not in any legal document. It was in what Claire named that baby. Because when the nurse asked for the full name, she looked at me with tears in her eyes and said, "Thomas, after your husband, because from everything you told me, he would have known I was telling the truth sooner than you did." And that hurt more than anything Daniel had done, because she was right, and some betrayals don't end when the liar is exposed. They end when the person who believed the lie finally admits what it cost. And that was the day I understood that blood does not make a family safe, character does. And if you've ever seen someone weaponize charm, status, or even love to control the truth, stay with me, because the most dangerous people are usually the ones who already know exactly who will believe them first.